Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe, and I'm going to be continuing my first time playing Lord of the Rings Online, LOTRO. But first, I'm just doing a bit of a shout out to Dragonlance Saga, whom hopefully I'll be live streaming with tomorrow. We're still hammering out a lot of details and whatnot, and hopefully the channel Just Good Enough is also going to be there. Hopefully. Unfortunately, Dragonlance Nexus had to drop out. Those guys are busy, which these things happen. So, to all Dragonlance fans, this is a Dragonlance dedicated channel. And while I've disagreed with some of the point of view of Adam, that is to say, the host of Dragonlance Saga. He's really good, actually. Like, you look at all the details he gets, all the lore. Oh man, he's got Magius. I gotta check that out later. I haven't been to this channel in a while, I'll confess. School's kept me busy, as has the running of the channel and whatnot. I can barely keep up most days. So we're gonna continue where we last left off. So sorry, had to kind of plug his channel. If you like Dragonlance, do go give him a like and a subscribe. I'm quite fond of his channel, actually. Oh shoot, I may go down. Oh, that's not good. That's not good. Oh boy. Yeah, I had to do that. Oh, can't let him live. Okay, that was not as easy as it looked. Okie dokie. Let's see. Now, it's been proposed with, we may at some point, well, the thing with the Dragonlance live streams is the hope is to turn it into a semi-permanent thing every few weeks. That's the hope that some of us have. It would be kind of like, I guess, Fellowship of the Fans, with how they have all these creatives from, I think, different channels getting together just to celebrate Lord of the Rings, and of course they're celebrating the Rings of Power, but we're going to be celebrating Dragonlance, which, I'm going to be honest, is probably my first real fantasy love I ever had, because I got into fantasy through Suikoden as a kid. The 90s classic RPG game from Japan. But the thing is, after that, I did read The Hobbit, and I loved it. But the trouble for me was that when I tried to read Lord of the Rings, I didn't get into it. I only read partway through the Fellowship, and then got bored for some reason. I don't know what I was thinking. I ended up picking up Lord of the Rings as an adult and felt passionately in love with it when I did. I was in my mid-20s when I picked it back up, and oh my gosh, I just fell in love. But anyways, Dragonlance was what I picked up at around 12 or 13, shortly after The Hobbit. And it was, I think, Dragons of Autumn Spring and Dragons at War, the anthology book, and I devoured them. And then I got into all the other books. And, well, I read all the Chronicles. I read Legend of Huma. I read the Kinslayer Wars. I read the King Priests trilogy. I read Ogre Titans. I read all the Raceland books. Oh, right. Brothers Magier I read shortly after I think it was the Chronicles. Oh well, it's all over up on the Dragonlance reading order video on our main channel. But, oh man. After this, I'm going to do some Dragonlance reading. Mostly of the Knights of Solamnia from the campaign setting. Oh man, I love the campaign setting. Every few weeks I just crack it open again. But the thing is, I've been swamped with classes and whatnot. As I explained a while back, like the past few weeks I've had finals, and then I've gotten now I'm working on my final thesis, and I'm almost halfway through the first draft, but I'm still doing a lot of reading, mostly of Jung and his students, who are brilliant but exhausting. Sometimes I just have a hard time retaining some of the data and info. They kind of info dump on you in their monographs and whatnot. I think that would be the correct term. And it is very difficult to retain that information. Well, because they're just so brilliant. Like, you can tell they're super smart, and they do, in a lot of cases, make it very evident, but it is a matter of properly digesting the information and the knowledge they're trying to convey. And it's kind of like reading, in terms of fiction, Dostoevsky and whatnot. Dostoevsky's a very complex author, because you can't trust the narrator, and you have to do almost more reading behind the scenes, like between the lines, than actually reading the lines, so to speak. And at least that's been my experience when it comes to Dostoevsky for my university literary classes. And with that said, as far as Dragonlance goes, I know not everyone really respects or loves it, but I don't know, I've got a huge passion for it. Oh, I can't wait for Dragons of Deceit. I cannot wait. Man, like, it's gonna be a blast. Let's try this one. I think I've got some boars. Yeah. Orc shields. Oh, my mistake. Kraben Slayer. Okay. I'll go over there. But as to the thesis, just to dive back into that real quick. And then there's also the I'm also having a hard time with reconciling some of the like just some of the recent versus older sources, because it's, well, there's a paradox. I think I've explained this before, between how the original Celtic and monastic sources of Scotland show Macbeth had to have been a heroic, or at least a competent king. And then you've got Shakespeare in the Holinshed Chronicles that show Macbeth to be a usurping buffoon. And I'm over-exaggerating there, because, like, the play is awesome. But it is not a credible source. But what I'm finding really weird is that a lot of modern day historians have used Macbeth, the play, as an actual historical source, both to color their vision of the figure and as an actual historical source. And it's just like, well, I remember when I was first studying this, I ended up watching a lot of the Neil Oliver documentaries, of course, because they were pretty good. That's how I first got introduced to Scottish history. But he didn't do Macbeth, but he drew a parallel, but like he explained that there's a difference between some of the other sources and the Scottish ones. And okay, but then when I ended up approaching this topic with one of my professors, who's a much more brilliant historian than I am, I remember getting a little confused and like as to why some people were using Shakespeare as a credible source for, I think, Richard III. Now, Richard III was a terrible king. He certainly was. He's a lot more horrid and incompetent historically than he was in the actual play. The play actually makes him out to be a pretty clever manipulator when he wasn't terribly bright historically. But this is the thing, like, my professor just simply said, you never look to Shakespeare as a source. Any kind of, like, you can love his plays. You should. You have to love them because they're just awesome. But don't ever put your trust in them as a source or emotionally put your trust in them when it comes to the history. You have to separate yourself from it. And I went, oh, okay. Then when I did a bit more research into Richard III, because this was for my undergrad degree for British history, and I remember just going, oh, okay. Then the same thing came up with one of the stewards, and he repeated this advice to me again, and I wasn't particularly prone to getting emotionally invested in certain monarchs or anything. It's just he repeated it often because he would repeat it to everyone, actually. He would just tell us, never get emotionally invested in your monarchs because, well, you can take their side on things, but you have to remember, you can't, if you get too emotionally invested, you might end up discounting certain data and just decide to neglect one source or another, or just discount or otherwise ignore what the actual sources are saying in favor of what you want them to say, which you're not supposed to let your own desires decide what the data says, so to speak. At least that's how we learn in the history departments. We have to just simply follow the sources and make the argument according to how we read it. And I know that sounds like tomato, but it's not. Like, you're not supposed to project onto the source what you want to say. You can interpret it a certain way, and you will because, well, human beings are human beings. But there is an objective truth and fact to everything in history. Like, the saying, the victor writes history, is not always true. Such as, well, this is where Macbeth had lost his wars, but it seems that the monks of his era favored him, and they wrote history with him having been this heroic, great guy, in marked contrast to the English sources. But then you've got, for example, the Ming dynasty of China. They lost a war later to the Qing dynasty. But the Ming kind of wrote history about the Han dynasty and Chu Han dynasty, when really that doesn't exactly follow the interests of the Qing dynasty exactly. But the losers wrote history there, so to speak. Well, losers, that's kind of a strong term there. But you get my point. But, like, that's the thing I'm finding just really peculiar about the modern day historians. Now, I'm not trying to attack them. Like, a lot of their, like, a lot of the monographs and books they write and notations they make are very fascinating. It's very fascinating, a lot of their conclusions about other kings. And they're highly reliable with those figures. Well, once you check, like, 30 sources between each other and, like, they're pretty much saying the same thing. Yeah, you kind of go, okay, so this source is reliable, because you have to double check it with the actual primary source. Then you have to compare it to another secondary source, to a bunch of secondary sources, I mean. But the trouble is, there's a lot of modern day historians who go, yep, Shakespeare told the truth. Except the primary sources don't match up, and some of the secondary sources reluctantly concede that, you know, the truth. And if you actually go to, like, the I think it's the Duncan Society, they're the guys really dedicated to the memory of King Duncan, the guy Macbeth usurped. They admit he was kind of a rotten king in that it was Macbeth's turn to become king because it's his cousin. And the Tanistry way of succession meant that Macbeth should get a turn at the kingship. Now, you look at that, you look at the oral traditions passed down, which we do have to take into account to an extent, to a limited extent. And you look at a lot of the sources, like, I think it's Baisi, something like that, I can't pronounce it in French. He ends up recording one thing, but it's backed up by some of the primary sources. There's just so much data to take in, and you just end up going, hold on, how come we're including some things but not others? And why are you, because there are some historians who are neglecting to, they're discounting sources. They're just saying, oh no, I'm not going to include, for example, who Macbeth's mother was very likely to have been. And it's like, but wait, we don't have any other source, but we only have like one or two sources about who Duncan's mom is, and yet we're taking that at face value. Shouldn't we kind of, until we can find out some source that says otherwise, or do some DNA testing, shouldn't we kind of assume the same thing that we've done with every other king? Because, you know, we always assume who their parents are in some cases. But we're not doing that here. And it's just, there are other details that's like, wait. Now, how to tell the Macbeth sources are reliable is by, if it's focused on Macbeth as a monograph, like if it's got Macbeth on the title, it's generally reliable in terms of a lot of information and whatnot. But the thing is, because they tend to cling more to the primary source. But then you've got the, if it's like, I can't say the titles, that'd be like I'm outing or doxing the authors, and I don't want that. I really like these guys, although I'm whining about them. Some of the sources that don't specify Macbeth in the title, they just end up making some wild assumptions. Well, actually, I should say the older historians, like those dating back to the 90s and before, are very, like, pre-revisionist. They just go, well, all the sources seem to say that Macbeth was pretty popular over in Elba. I guess he was a popular king, whatever. But then you got the post-revisionist who go, no, Shakespeare says otherwise. Wait, why are we following Shakespeare again? Because, like, before the 19th century, people thought Shakespeare was telling a historical truth. But we're back to that. So actually, is this a pre-revisionist thing? I can't. Anyways. I think I blathered on and on. enough as it is, and I've played long enough. So don't forget to go give my buddy Dragonlance Saga a good view. Take care, everyone. And don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button to stay tuned for my next playthrough. Till next time, take care!